For 7 years, Marcus Ellis wired home every dollar he earned on a Dubai construction site. Every Sunday, his father called, voice heavy with weariness, describing roof leaks, dry rot, crumbling foundations. Marcus never questioned him. He trusted the man who raised him. Then he stepped off a Greyhound in Tallahassee, walked to the lane his grandfather once cleared, and found nothing but kudzu and a rusted mailbox. The house he'd spent years paying to save had been bulldozed long before. Marcus Ellis was not a careless man. He kept every wire transfer receipt. He answered every Sunday call. He sacrificed 7 years of his life for people he loved without condition. This is a story about what happens when blind trust meets calculated cruelty, and about the moment a son must decide whether the family that betrayed him is still worth fighting for. But first, you need to understand exactly how the lie was built. Marcus grew up in a narrow wood frame house on the edge of Tallahassee, the kind of neighborhood where ambition either gets you out or gets you buried. His grandfather had cleared that land with his own hands decades before Marcus was born, and the family had held on to it the way people hold on to the only thing that proves they were ever here. The house was never grand, but it was theirs, and in a place where so much had been taken from so many people, ownership meant everything. His father, Raymond Ellis, was a man who knew how to appear capable without always being capable. He had charm in abundance and excuses in greater supply. To the neighbors, he was Raymond, friendly, loud at cookouts, always with a story. To Marcus, he was simply Dad, and that word carried more weight than any evidence could correct. Marcus's mother, Dottie, was the quiet center of everything. She kept the household running on almost nothing. She stretched groceries, mended clothes, and never once complained loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. She was the kind of woman whose dignity cost her more than anyone realized. When Marcus was 26, a labor recruiter came through town offering construction contracts in Dubai. The money was real, more than he could make in 3 years of local work compressed into 12 months. Marcus had no criminal record, a clean driver's license, and hands that already knew how to pour concrete and read blueprints. He was exactly what they needed. He told his mother first. She pressed her lips together and nodded slowly. The way she did when something hurt, but love outweighed the pain. His father clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Go build something worth coming home to." At the time, it sounded like wisdom. Marcus would spend 7 years learning it was instruction. He left on a Tuesday in early spring. The first transfer home came 6 weeks later, $400. Nearly a full week's take-home after the recruiter's fees. He attached a message. For the house, for Mom, take care of them. Raymond acknowledged it with a 2-sentence text. Received it. Thank you, son. And that was the beginning. The Sunday calls started almost immediately. Raymond was reliable about them in a way he had never been reliable about anything else. The calls came every week without exception. Early afternoon Tallahassee time, late evening in Dubai. And every call followed the same architecture. How are you, son? Good, good. Things are fine here. Then, after a pause designed to feel reluctant, there is one thing, though. The roof was leaking above the back bedroom. Then the foundation blocks on the east side needed resetting. Then the floor joists had dry rot spreading from the corner near the bathroom. Then the porch railing was unsafe, and someone could get hurt. Each crisis arrived at the perfect interval, just long enough after the last one to feel like a separate problem rather than a pattern. Marcus sent money every time. He never asked for photos. He never asked for contractor receipts. He told himself it was because he trusted his father. The harder truth, the one he would only confront years later sitting on a curb with receipts in his hand, was that he needed to believe the money was doing something. He needed that image of his mother safe on a repaired porch to make the dust and the heat and the isolation feel purposeful. In 7 years, Marcus Ellis wired home just over $63,000. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. Because it stopped Marcus completely when he finally added it up on his phone. His mother never saw most of it. She was moved out of that house 4 years before Marcus came home. 4 years. She had been living above a laundromat in a single room with a shared bathroom while Marcus stood on scaffolding in the desert sending money home to a house that had already been knocked down. Raymond had sold the land to a residential developer 18 months after Marcus left. The bulldozers came not long after. And every Sunday call that followed. Every careful description of roof leaks and rotting wood and crumbling foundation was a performance delivered from wherever Raymond happened to be that week. What Marcus did not know yet was where his father was right now. And what he found when he started asking questions was worse than an empty lot. It was a life Raymond had been building with Marcus's money all along. Raymond Ellis had not been hard to find. That was the first thing that stunned Marcus, not the betrayal itself, but how openly it had been lived. Raymond had not fled to another state. He had not changed his phone number or hidden his name. He had simply counted on the fact that Marcus was far away and trusting, and that trust, in Raymond's calculation, was as good as invisibility. The neighbor who told Marcus the truth was a woman named Clara, mid-60s, gray braids, a garden hose still in her hand, when Marcus walked up the lane and stopped in front of the weeds. She had known the Ellis family for 30 years. She had watched Dottie hang laundry and tend tomatoes. She had watched Marcus leave with a duffel bag and a handshake from his father that looked, she said, like a man sending someone away rather than seeing someone off. Clara did not make Marcus ask twice. She had been waiting for this conversation the way a person waits for something overdue. The house had been sold to a development company called Meridian Residential Partners, a mid-sized firm that bought undervalued lots in historically black neighborhoods on the outskirts of Tallahassee, cleared them, and replaced them with rental units priced for a different demographic entirely. The transaction had closed quietly. Raymond had signed a loan. Dottie's name had been on the original deed alongside his, but by the time the sale went through, Raymond had already had that corrected. A quiet legal maneuver processed through a notary whose office, Marcus would later learn, operated out of a strip mall near the interstate. The sale price was $112,000. Marcus stood in the weeds and heard that number and felt nothing for a moment. Then he felt everything at once. $112,000 for land his grandfather had cleared by hand. For the home where his mother had raised 3 children. For the address Marcus had written on every transfer receipt as the place he was building toward. Clara told him the rest in careful pieces, watching his face the way people watch someone receive news that cannot be unwound. Raymond had moved Dottie out before the bulldozers came. He had found her a room above a laundromat on Decatur Street, a single room with a hot plate, a shared bathroom at the end of the hall, and a window that looked out onto a delivery alley. He had told her it was temporary. He had been telling her that for 4 years. Then Clara said the part she had clearly rehearsed, because she said it quickly, as if speed made it more bearable. Raymond had purchased a 22-foot bass boat the same month the land sale closed. He had also moved a woman named Cheryl, 34 years old, which made her 22 years younger than Raymond, into a rented house on the north side of town. The house had a garage for the boat and a yard with a gas grill. Marcus looked down at the duffel bag at his feet. He had packed it in Dubai at 4 in the morning, too excited to sleep. He had folded everything carefully. He had carried the transfer receipts in a zipper pocket against his chest, the whole flight home, like they were documents of something real. He counted them that night in a motel room, $63,420, sent over 7 years. Every one of them labeled with a purpose: roof repair, foundation work, floor joists, porch railing. Problems that had never existed on a house that had already been knocked down. And here is where the story pivots in a way that took Marcus several days to fully absorb. He had assumed his father had spent the wire transfers on the boat and on Cheryl and on whatever else Raymond had decided he deserved. That assumption was correct, but incomplete. When Marcus finally reached his mother, when he drove to Decatur Street and climbed the narrow stairwell and knocked on the door of room 4, what he found forced him to reframe the entire 7 years differently. Dottie Ellis opened the door and looked at her son for a long moment before she stepped back to let him in. The room was small enough that 2 people standing in it filled it. There was a single bed, a folding chair, a hot plate on a TV tray, and a plastic bin that served as a dresser. A photograph of Marcus was taped to the wall above the bed. It was a photo from before he left, 26 years old, grinning, holding up a set of blueprints he had drafted himself. She had kept it there for 7 years. Marcus sat on the folding chair and his mother sat on the bed, and he asked her the question he had been forming since he stood in the weeds on that vacant lot. "Did you know?" Dottie folded her hands in her lap. "Not right away," she said. "For the first 2 years, Raymond gave me some of what you sent. Not much. 100 here, 50 there. He said the rest was going to repairs." She paused. "I believed him because I wanted to, and because asking questions had never gone well." Marcus absorbed that sentence. Asking questions had never gone well. He had not grown up in a house where his father was violent, not in any way that left marks. But Raymond Ellis had a way of making doubt feel disloyal. He had a way of turning a reasonable question into evidence that you did not trust him. And in a household where his pride was the dominant weather system, distrust was expensive. His mother had learned to work around him the way water works around stone. By year 3, Dottie told Marcus the small amounts had stopped coming. Raymond said Marcus's job had gotten difficult, said the money was thinner, said they should be grateful he was sending anything at all. And Dottie, who by then was already out of the house and in the room on Decatur Street, had no way to verify any of it, because she did not have access to a bank account and her phone was a prepaid with limited data. She had no way to reach Marcus directly without Raymond knowing. Marcus looked at her hands. She was 61 years old, and her hands looked like someone who had worked every day of those 61 years and rested for almost none of them. He thought about every Sunday call, his father's voice, tired and weary, describing the house, the leaks, the rot, the one more emergency. Raymond had been sitting on a 22-foot bass boat on a lake outside Tallahassee, making those calls. Marcus was almost certain of it now, while Dottie was 3 miles away in a room the size of a walk-in closet. That image, his father on the water, phone in hand, performing exhaustion, was the one Marcus could not set down. But there was something else. Something Dottie had not said yet, but that Marcus could feel gathering at the edges of everything she had told him. He watched her hands twist together in her lap, and he recognized that motion. It was the same motion Clara had made with the garden hose before she started talking. The motion of a person about to say the part that is worse than the part that already felt like the worst. He waited. And when his mother finally looked up and said his name, not son, not baby, just Marcus. The way she said it when he was a boy, and something serious needed both of them to be very still, he understood that the land sale and the bass boat and the wire transfers were not the end of what Raymond had done. They were only what Marcus could see. What came next had been hidden in a place Marcus had never thought to look. What Dottie had been hiding was not one thing. It was a system. She reached under the bed and pulled out a shoebox. Not dramatically, she did it the way a person retrieves something they have retrieved many times before, slowly, without ceremony, because the weight of it had long since stopped surprising her. She placed it on the bed between them and lifted the lid. Inside were letters, folded, some of them opened, some still sealed. Marcus recognized his own handwriting on several envelopes, notes he had sent home in the early years before he switched entirely to digital transfers. Back when he still believed a handwritten word carried something a bank receipt could not. Not all of the letters were from him. There were notices. Official ones. A letter from a Florida Consumer Credit Bureau. 2 notices from a lending institution Marcus had never heard of. And at the bottom, a document that had been folded and refolded so many times the creases had turned soft as cloth. A personal loan agreement for $18,000, dated roughly 5 years earlier, taken out in the name of Marcus James Ellis. Marcus picked it up carefully. The way you pick up something you are not sure is real. His name, his social security number, his date of birth, his mother's address on the lane his grandfather had cleared, the address of a house that, by the time this document was signed, had already been knocked down for 3 years. He had not signed this. He had been in Dubai when this was signed. He had been pouring footings for a hotel complex on the edge of the desert, sleeping 6 hours a night in a shared dormitory, eating from a canteen, and sending money home. Raymond had borrowed $18,000 in his son's name and had never made a single payment. The account had gone to collections. The collections agency had reported it. Marcus Ellis, who had spent 7 years building a disciplined financial life from scratch, who had opened a savings account, maintained a clean credit file, and planned carefully for the day he came home, had a default judgment sitting on his credit report that he had not known existed until this moment in a room the size of a walk-in closet on Decatur Street in Tallahassee. He sat very still. Dottie watched him read. She had clearly read the documents herself enough times to know their contents without looking. She said, "I found it 2 years ago. A man came to the door, a collections agent. He was looking for you. He showed me paperwork with your name on it. I told him you lived overseas. He left a card. I called the number on the card, and they told me what it was." Marcus looked up. "Did you tell Raymond you knew?" She shook her head once. By then I had learned not to tell Raymond things. That sentence carried a decade in it. She had lived in this room, 4 years at that point, with this knowledge, with this shoebox, protecting her son from a truth she had no way to deliver to him safely. She did not have reliable access to the internet. Raymond controlled the family phone plan. The one time she had tried to reach Marcus directly through a phone at the public library, she had been interrupted by a call from Raymond asking where she was. She had hung up before Marcus answered. Marcus put the loan document back in the shoebox. He looked at the photograph of himself taped to the wall above the bed, 26 years old, grinning, holding blueprints, and felt the distance between that person and the man sitting in a folding chair with a shoebox full of evidence on his lap. He had come home to rescue his mother. He had arrived to find she had been quietly trying to rescue him for years. And here is where the story shifts again, because what Marcus did next was not what Raymond would have predicted. Raymond had built his entire scheme on a specific understanding of his son, that Marcus was trusting, that Marcus was far away, and that Marcus, if he ever did come back, would be too overwhelmed with emotion to move quickly or strategically. Raymond did not know the man his son had become. Marcus had spent 7 years on international construction sites, which meant he had spent 7 years navigating contracts in a second language, managing disputes with subcontractors across 3 time zones, learning to read the difference between a handshake that meant something and one that meant nothing. He had built a professional life in a country where he had no family, no backup, and no margin for error. He was not overwhelmed. He was methodical. He spent the next 2 days doing 3 things. First, he contacted a consumer law attorney in Tallahassee who specialized in identity theft and fraudulent credit accounts. The attorney, a woman named Patricia Owens, reviewed the loan document, the timeline, and the collection notices and told Marcus directly that what he was looking at was criminal fraud, not a civil misunderstanding. Not a family dispute that could be smoothed over with a conversation. Criminal fraud. Second, Marcus went to the county recorder's office and pulled the deed history on the property his grandfather had cleared. He needed to see the full chain of title, every transfer, every recorded instrument, every signature. What he found confirmed what Clara had told him, but also added a detail that no one had mentioned yet. The deed transfer to Meridian Residential Partners had been notarized by someone named Gerald Foss. Marcus did not recognize that name, but Patricia Owens did. She went quiet for a moment when Marcus said it, and then told him that Gerald Foss had appeared in 2 previous cases her office had handled involving distressed property sales in the same area of Tallahassee. Both involved elderly or vulnerable sellers. Both involved prices well below market value. Both had moved through the county recorder's office faster than normal deed transfers typically moved. Gerald Foss was not a corrupt notary operating alone. He was the bottom of something larger. Meridian Residential Partners, Marcus discovered through a simple corporate records search, was registered in Delaware but operated primarily in 4 Florida counties. Its portfolio consisted almost entirely of lots acquired from families in financial distress, most of them in historically underserved neighborhoods. Most of the transactions completed within narrow windows that gave sellers little time to seek independent counsel. The company had no public complaints filed against it, not because it had done nothing wrong, but because its sellers were almost never in a position to fight back. Raymond Ellis had not stumbled into a bad deal. He had been found by people who were very good at finding men like Raymond, men with leverage over property they did not entirely deserve to control, men with debts and appetites and a willingness to sign things quickly if the number sounded large enough in the moment. $112,000 had sounded large to Raymond. The property, properly appraised with a competent agent and adequate time, would have been worth closer to $240,000 in the current market. Raymond had been cheated too. He had simply cheated his family far more. When Marcus brought this information back to Patricia Owens and added the fraudulent loan agreement to the file, she looked at the accumulation of documents on her desk for a long moment and said something Marcus would not forget. She said, "This did not happen because your father was desperate. Desperate men make one mistake. Your father made dozens of deliberate choices over 7 years. That is not desperation. That is a way of living." Marcus drove back to Decatur Street that evening. He brought groceries. He brought a new prepaid phone for his mother with his number already saved in it. He sat with her on the folding chair, and they ate together in that small room while the sounds of the delivery alley came through the window. Before he left, Dottie asked him what he was going to do. Marcus looked at the shoebox on the bed. He looked at his own photograph on the wall. He said, "I'm going to do what he always assumed I was too far away to do." And what happened next, what Marcus set in motion in the days that followed, was the part Raymond Ellis had never once prepared for. Marcus filed the criminal fraud complaint on a Thursday morning. Patricia Owens submitted it to the Leon County Sheriff's Office, along with a parallel complaint to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, citing identity theft, fraudulent use of personal identification, and financial exploitation of a family member. The fraudulent loan document, $18,000 borrowed in Marcus's name without his knowledge or consent, was the clearest instrument in the file. The signature on it did not match Marcus's actual signature any more than the deed transfer had matched his grandfather's vision for that land. Raymond Ellis was served with notice 4 days later. Marcus was not present for that. He had made a deliberate decision not to be. He did not want to watch his father's face when the papers arrived. He did not want to feel whatever complicated grief that sight would trigger before he had finished doing what needed to be done. He heard about it secondhand. Through Patricia, who heard it from the process server, Raymond had been in the driveway of the rented house on the north side of town, washing the bass boat when the officer pulled up. The boat was still wet when he read what was in his hand. Patricia simultaneously filed a civil action challenging the deed transfer to Meridian Residential Partners on the grounds of potential fraud and inadequate consideration, the legal term for a sale price so far below fair market value that it raises questions about whether the seller was properly informed or improperly pressured. She included the Gerald Foss connection in the filing and copied the Leon County Property Appraiser's Office, which triggered an administrative review of Foss's notarizations over the prior 4 years. That review, once it opened, did not close quickly. Gerald Foss had notarized 41 property transactions in that same zip code over a 3-year window. 37 of them involved sellers who were either elderly, in documented financial distress, or both. 18 of those properties had been acquired by Meridian Residential Partners, or one of 4 affiliated entities with overlapping ownership structures and the same registered agent in Delaware. Marcus had not set out to expose a predatory real estate operation. He had set out to recover what his mother had lost and to hold his father accountable. But the thread he pulled was connected to something much larger, and once the county started pulling alongside him, it did not stop. The Florida Attorney General's office opened a parallel inquiry into Meridian within 6 weeks of Marcus's initial filing. 3 other families from the same area came forward once the inquiry became public, families who had sold land or homes through the same notary, at similar below-market prices, during similar compressed timelines. One of them was a 73-year-old woman who had sold a property her husband had purchased in 1968. She had never understood the paperwork she signed. She had trusted the man who brought it to her door. She was not Dottie Ellis, but she could have been. The civil action against the deed transfer entered a long process that Marcus understood from the beginning would not be resolved in weeks or even months. Florida property law moves at its own pace, and challenging a completed deed transfer requires patience of the kind Marcus had learned in Dubai. The patience of a man who builds things with the knowledge that foundations take longer than walls. He did not expect the land back immediately. What he expected was a record, a documented challenge, a legal cloud over Meridian's title that would complicate any further development of the lot until the courts had spoken. Meridian's construction on the property stopped within 3 weeks of the filing. Whether that was a legal caution or a business calculation, Marcus did not know. He drove past the lot on a Tuesday and saw the equipment sitting idle behind temporary fencing. The concrete wall his grandfather would never have recognized still standing at the back of the property, and the weeds beginning to reclaim the edges of what had been poured. He took a photograph. He did not know exactly why. It felt important to document the pause. Raymond's criminal case moved on a separate track. The identity theft charge was the strongest instrument, and the collections agency that held the defaulted loan, once they understood the circumstances, cooperated fully with the investigation. The fraudulent loan was formally disputed and flagged. Marcus's credit file was corrected. That process took time and required more paperwork than felt reasonable for something that had not been his fault to begin with, but it moved, and it cleared. Raymond eventually hired an attorney who advised him to stop talking. He stopped returning Marcus's calls, not that Marcus had made many. The last message Marcus sent his father was not angry. It was 3 sentences. It said, "I have copies of everything. Patricia Owens is handling this. You should focus on your own legal situation now." Raymond did not respond. And then came the detail that Marcus had not expected. The detail that arrived not through an attorney or an official process, but through a phone call from Cheryl, Raymond's girlfriend. The 34-year-old woman Marcus had only known as a name in a sentence Clara had said in a weedy front yard. Cheryl called Marcus directly. She had gotten his number from somewhere, from Raymond's phone, or from a mutual contact. It was never entirely clear. She called on a weeknight, and Marcus almost did not answer because he did not recognize the number. She told him she had left Raymond 3 weeks after the legal papers arrived. She told him Raymond had spent a significant portion of the land sale money before they met, and had been borrowing from her since, framing it as a short-term situation that was perpetually about to resolve itself. She told him she had found out about Dottie, about the room on Decatur Street, about how long Dottie had been there, only recently, and that she was sorry. Marcus listened without interrupting. Then, Cheryl said one more thing. She said that Raymond talked about Marcus often, especially when he was drinking, that he called him the good one, that he had said more than once that Marcus was the only one in the family who had ever amounted to anything. Marcus held the phone for a moment after she finished. He thanked her for calling and said goodnight. He sat with that information for a long time. A man who had spent 7 years dismantling his son's future had spent those same years telling a woman in private that the son was the best of them. There is no clean way to hold that kind of contradiction. It does not resolve into forgiveness or into rage. It sits in a category for which there is no good word. The grief of understanding that a person who hurt you was not entirely unaware of your worth. Marcus understood it. He did not let it change anything. What he did instead was find his mother a 2-bedroom apartment in a clean, quiet building on the east side of Tallahassee, ground floor, because she had mentioned once that stairs were getting harder, and Marcus had been listening. He paid the first year's rent in full. He set up a direct account in her name that Raymond could not touch. He arranged for a home health aide to check in twice a week, because Dottie would never ask for help, but would accept it if it simply appeared. On the day she moved in, Marcus carried the shoebox himself. He set it on the kitchen counter, and she looked at it and then looked at him. She asked if she should throw it away. He said that was entirely up to her. She left it on the counter. Later, when he came back with groceries, it was gone. He did not ask where. The photograph from the wall on Decatur Street, the one of him at 26, grinning, holding blueprints, was on the windowsill of the new apartment. She had framed it. A small wooden frame, nothing expensive. Just enough to say that this one stays. The legal processes continued on their long, slow timelines. Marcus checked in with Patricia Owens regularly and built the rest of his days around something more immediate, the work of being present. He found a job with a construction firm based in Tallahassee, mid-sized, the kind of company where someone with his credentials moved quickly. Within a year, he was supervising projects. Within 2, he was bidding his own contracts. He drove past the vacant lot every few weeks. The weeds kept coming back. The concrete wall kept standing. The legal cloud kept its shape. He never stopped driving past. Because the land was still part of the story, and Marcus Ellis was not the kind of man who looked away from unfinished things. But he had learned something in that room on Decatur Street, sitting across from his mother with a shoebox of stolen years between them. He had learned that the most important thing he had ever built was not a structure. It was the decision to come home and look clearly at what he found there, and then to stay. Some people are robbed of their past and spend the rest of their lives trying to recover it. Marcus was different. He had looked at the weeds in the mailbox and the rusted gate his father had left behind, and he had understood that the foundation his grandfather cleared was not in the ground anymore. It was in him, and that was the part Raymond had never managed to sell. Stories like Marcus Ellis's are rarely told out loud. They live in shoeboxes under beds, in folded loan documents with other people's signatures, in the silences between Sunday phone calls that were never quite what they sounded like. They live in the specific shame of a person who was deceived by someone they were supposed to be able to trust completely. A shame that does not belong to the victim, but settles on them anyway, the way smoke settles into a room. What makes this story matter beyond one family and one city is the pattern it reveals. Not every betrayal involves a bass boat and a vacant lot, but the architecture of this kind of harm, the careful management of distance, the manufactured dependency, the slow erosion of a person's ability to verify what they are being told, that architecture appears in family systems everywhere. It does not require a villain who twirls his mustache. It only requires someone who has learned that love, when it is deep enough, does not ask for receipts. Marcus asked for receipts, eventually, and what he found when he finally looked was not just proof of what had been taken. It was proof of what had survived. Dottie Ellis is still in that ground floor apartment on the east side of Tallahassee. She has a small garden on the patio now. She grew tomatoes last summer. She told Marcus they were the best tomatoes she had grown in 20 years. And he believes her, because she has never been a woman who exaggerated small joys. The land case is still active. The truth, once it starts moving, does not always move fast. But it moves. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about someone you love, or about a silence you have been keeping too long, leave a comment below and tell us what it brought up for you. And if you believe that people who sacrifice deserve honesty in return, subscribe. There are more stories here that refuse to look away.